Hey everybody, Doomwake here, and welcome back to episode 3, or I guess week 3, of Watching the Meta. If you haven't been with us the past couple of weeks, we have been taking a look at the evolution of the Pioneer metagame as we fastly approach the Regional Championship upcoming only a couple of weeks away in DC. That is the United States Regional Championship. There are certainly other ones that are happening. I'm not entirely sure the dates on when those are, as far as like the Asia Pacific, Europe, Japan, things like that. I'm not entirely sure when those are happening, but I do know that the United States one is only a couple of weeks away. So we only got 1 or 2 more episodes before I'm going to be traveling to DC to likely play Phoenix, but maybe something else comes up. And what I have for you today is a little interesting compared to what we saw last week. Before we continue, as always, if you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really does help out the analytics. And last but certainly not least, let me know what you thought in the comment section down below, because there are certainly ways to improve this style of content. And as we sort of do more of these week to week, we can maybe explore some other formats and maybe do, I know you guys said that you liked the pie charts last week, so we're going to do some more of those today. But yeah, I'm really interested in your feedback, because I think that there's tons of ways to improve this and kind of a sort of underexplored content space. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the first challenge, which was on Friday. So, shocker, big surprise, Izzet Phoenix on top, but it's not by a lot. So 6 copies of Izzet Phoenix, 5 Azorius Control, 5 Rakdos Prowess. This is kind of the big menace, the big baddie of the format right now. And then kind of a smattering some other stuff. You see 3 Celestia Angels, 2 Jund Sacrifice, Yorion Lumra, Azorius Spirits, and then a couple of one-ofs. Interesting to note here, Mono White Humans. First time I feel like we've seen that in quite some time. And as far as the matchup spread is concerned, I think Humans traditionally struggles against stuff like Rakdos midrange. Personally, I think it maybe has a slightly weak matchup against Phoenix, especially once you get to the sideboard games with sweepers and things like that. And then also one thing you got to watch out about is with the release of Duskmourn, we are going to be getting access to Pyroclasm, which I believe Phoenix will probably want to be playing over the various 3-mana options like Brotherhood's End and Anger of the Gods. A little bit worse against Sacrifice because it doesn't destroy Witch's Oven and things like that, but just keep that in mind for people who are interested in playing Humans or Boros Convoke. Pyroclasm really changes the dynamic of those matchups. Before, you could put a bunch of stuff into play and maybe get a big attack in before they sweep, but now it's going to be a lot harder to do that with Pyroclasm. But yeah, I mean, as far as this challenge is concerned, nothing too crazy. It's not like there's anything super top-heavy. The top is kind of spread enough out a little bit. I would say that Phoenix, Azorius, and Rakdos are kind of the top 3 decks in the format right now. But moving swiftly along to the Saturday challenge. So, I was doing some research, and I didn't realize this at first, but there's actually 3 challenges on Sunday and only 1 on Saturday, because for some reason the Sunday one has a backup where they have, I think it's 5 o'clock and 5:30, but the Saturday challenge does not have a backup, and I feel like maybe they should do 2 on Sunday, 2 on Saturday. That's just me. But the first challenge on Saturday was slightly more top-heavy, and Azorius Control coming out on top. 7 copies, there's 5 Jund Sacrifice, 4 Boros Control, 4 Rakdos Prowess, 3 Izzet Phoenix, and then we are going to take a look at that. I know what you're looking at, viewer at home. You're looking at Simic Greenshell. You want to know what the heck that is. We'll get into that in a second. And then you see some other one-ofs here. As far as the top is concerned, a little bit more top-heavy for Azorius Control, which again, I think that makes a little bit of sense. The Azorius Control decks that people have been playing lately, I think are geared a lot more towards the Phoenix matchup. For example, this one from top 8 in the hands of Duder 611 that got 5th place. You see main deck copies of High Noons, which is, I feel like, not something I've seen a ton of before. Maybe it's just because I haven't been paying as much attention to Azorius Control decks. But main deck High Noon, really good against Phoenix. Main deck Narset Parter of Veils, also very good against Phoenix. And then when you get to the sideboard, there's some more stuff. There's an additional copy of High Noon, the Mystical Disputes, that sort of stuff is great against Phoenix too. But yeah, main deck High Noon, main deck Narset, that is definitely a statement. You know, be sure to let me know in the comments. I'm not an Azorius Control player, but if people have been doing that more recently, you know, like I said, let me know. It's not something that I've seen before, but just something worth note. And maybe why Azorius Control is maybe getting up a little bit more towards the top, because I think it naturally has a good matchup against the Rakdos Prowess deck with the 4 copies of March of Otherworldly Light and the main deck lockdowns alongside Verdicts and Sunfall. Wandering Emperor also pretty good against the Rakdos Prowess deck because they're not playing protection spells. So if they go for one big attacker, you Emperor them, they can't protect their creature with the Blossoming Defense or anything like that. So you have a good matchup against Rakdos. I think you can make your matchup against Phoenix a little bit more palatable, and lo and behold, you now have 2 good matchups against your other 2 best decks, and that means that Azorius Control can maybe rise up a little bit to the top. The other thing I want to mention here is 4 copies of Boros Control. Now, this is a deck that had picked up a little bit in popularity over the past couple of weeks. I believe in the hands of Oaf McNamara, we discussed it. I think it was last week. It may have been the week before. I can't remember exactly. But Boros Control. Now, I'm going to put a sample deck list. This is actually the deck that won the challenge in first place by Gasman48. And there's no creatures. This is the definition of control. Now, there is some ways to win the game, obviously, like Carrot Cake makes tokens, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Wandering Emperor, you have the lands that make tokens, there's a Westvale Abbey, 4 copies of Fountain Port. But one thing I want to point your attention towards is 4 copies of High Noon in the main deck. Now, we saw this with Azorius Control, but as of right now, there is a ton of Rakdos Prowess and Izzet Phoenix. Those are 2 of the most played decks in the format. And both of those decks want to play a ton of spells in the same turn. High Noon, really good card against those decks. It just basically makes them play on sort of an even playing field. Alongside 4 March of Otherworldly Light, as I talked about last week, against Rakdos Prowess, the best removal spells you can play are ones that exile, so you don't trigger Heartfire Hero. 4 Marches makes a lot of sense. And then 4 Sunfalls as well. So you can kind of see how this is maybe not like the best, maybe not the most well-rounded deck, but as far as where the metagame is headed, I think it's got a lot of good matchups, so it makes a lot of sense. And last but not least, before we leave the Saturday challenge, we have to talk about this 9th place deck list, just barely missing out on top 8, the user LAA11. I don't know what to call this. This is Simic Fecund Greenshell. Now, I will say, be on the lookout for a video upcoming because I'm going to be playing this deck on stream today. But what's going on here is we have Fecund Greenshell, which is a card from Bloomburrow. When it or a creature you control with toughness greater than its power comes into play, you look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it into the battlefield tapped. Otherwise, you draw it. And the joke here is you have a lot of creatures that have more toughness than their power that generate mana. Grazer, Clifftop Lookout finds a land. Dream Drew Entrancer doesn't find lands, but it draws cards, and it's a 3/4. Gilded Goose makes mana. Outcaster Greenblade finds lands. Caryatid makes mana. So you have plenty of ways to just jump the mana. Storm the Festival can hit 2 of them, maybe even a second Green Shell to draw more cards and get more lands into play. And then the end game is just get 10 lands, attack with a bunch of creatures with a Green Shell. So really sweet, really cool deck, and I'm very excited to get my hands on this one, because this one looks like a lot of fun, and congratulations to LAA11. All right, so now we are going to get into the Sunday challenges, because there are 3 of them. So the first one that I have here for you is, I believe, the one that was Sunday morning. Here's the breakdown. So 5 Azorius Control, 5 Rakdos Prowess. The top is, I mean, they're kind of jockeying back and forth for positioning, but it does seem like those are probably the 2 most played or 2 best decks in the format. Followed by Rakdos Midrange at 4 copies. And then what I found interesting about this particular top 32 compared to every other top 32 of the challenges that I looked at, there is a lot more one-ofs here, a lot more variations, and just a lot more spice, which we're going to take a look at a couple of those. So you'll see the breakdown here as far as, 2 Creativity, 2 5-color Enigmatic, 2 Phoenix, and then all of the one-ofs. I'm not going to list off all of them, but we are certainly going to talk about some of these decks. Now, before we get into the spice, let's just briefly touch on the top of the metagame. Again, Azorius Control, Rakdos Prowess. It's really just trying to figure out which one of those 2 decks can jockey for position. It's back and forth. As far as the highest placing Azorius Control deck, looking at it right here, it's a lot of the same stuff. The main deck High Noons, there's 1 Narset in this deck. A little bit lighter on sweepers. There's 2 Verdict, 1 Farewell, no Sunfalls. But again, more marches to kind of help against the Rakdos Prowess deck. So it does seem like these Azorius Control decks are making a lot more concessions to Rakdos Prowess and Phoenix, and I think that makes a lot of sense. As the metagame shifts, not shifts, but as it's the word that I'm looking for, as it kind of flattens out. Is that the right term? But as we get a more established metagame where these are the clear three top decks, Phoenix, Azorius, and Rakdos Prowess, you can target those with very specific and surgical card choices, as we see in this list by King Harry in third place. Past that, as far as the flattening out of the metagame, not too much else to talk about, but there is some spice here. So the first list that I want to bring your attention to is the 8th place list by user Phelan. I think it's Phelan, that's how you would pronounce that. So Boros Control, which is a deck that we talked about in the last challenge, and it is basically, it's trying to utilize token makers like Carrot Cake, Wandering Emperor, Caretaker's Talent, things like that to just generate some value and some card advantage. And then it's utilizing red removal. Some use Torch, some use Helix, and things like that. But what if we replace the red removal with black interaction, which, generically speaking, black has the best interaction in Pioneer. And that is exactly what Phelan did. So it's got a lot of similarities to the Boros deck with Carrot Cake, Caretaker's Talent, Wandering Emperor, Sunfall. But instead of the red removal, we've replaced that with Fatal Push Thoughtseize. Shocker, I know, those cards are good. But it's also playing a little bit more creatures. So the Boros version, which we just saw, was creatureless with Kahira. This one is playing 4 Novice Inspector and 4 3-Bit Inspector, which is interesting. You might think that's a little weird, but we are playing those to help facilitate Deadly Dispute, which is another black card that gives you a little bit of card advantage, and maybe something that the red deck was missing. Like, sure, you have Caretaker's Talent as a way to draw cards, but past that, Boros doesn't have a ton of card advantage. So Deadly Dispute, being able to, say, sacrifice an Inspector after you made a clue, you can draw 2 off the dispute, pop the clue later, that's a 3rd card down the road. So I like this approach, and I'm maybe interested in exploring this a little bit more, because I feel like people have just defaulted to Boros being the version of this token style deck to play. But I mean, Fatal Push and Thoughtseize are really good Magic cards, so it makes a lot of sense to do something like this. And like I said, maybe something worth exploring even a little bit further. All right, a little more spice here. Coming in 13th place, this is Strangled Angles, and we have quite a banger here. This is a Boros Collector's Cage. Now, I have played against Strangled Angles quite a few times playing this particular deck, and they've kicked my ass a couple of times. And my favorite synergy by far of this deck is just, well, I mean, not necessarily synergy, but just the card Dusk Legion Duelist. There's so many cool ways to utilize this card, where whenever you put a counter on it, you draw a card, but it only triggers once each turn. So the powerful, like the way to sort of synergize and abuse the Dusk Legion Duelist is put a counter on your turn, and find a way to put a counter on their turn, because it will trigger on their turn as well. So, ways to put counters on our turn, we have Inti Seneschal of the Sun, Kumada faces Kakazan, Wandering Emperor. I guess Emperor can also do it on their turn as well. But the main card that puts counters on their turn, Collector's Cage. Cage is a card that pays you off for having different powers of creatures, which Duelist and just in general having ways to put counters on your creatures like Kumano and Emperor and Inti allows you to mix and match a ton of different powers, so it's much easier to trigger Collector's Cage in a deck like this. And then you're not going super over the top with big payoffs. I'm trying to remember the name of the white Craterhoof behemoth. I'm sure my editor will put it up on screen right now. But people used to, Moonshaker Cavalry, that's what it was. People used to play that card, myself included. But realistically, Emeria's Call is just good enough. And it's also a land, so you don't really have, you're not losing out on a ton by playing a bunch of copies of Emeria's Call because they're just in your mana base. But it's also a really good payoff for Collector's Cage. So really cool deck here. Love what's going on here. A ton of stuff to sack the Torch the Tower as well. We've highlighted how good Torch is because it exiles the Heartfire heroes and such. Really cool deck. Big fan of this one. And then last but certainly not least, I just want to give a quick shout out here to Target in 17th place. I will tell you, spoiler alert, this is not the last time you're going to be seeing a Acererak deck. This is really cool. It's a combo deck that is built around Acererak the Arc Lich, utilizing ways to discount its mana cost like Honest Rutstein or Gwenag Eyes of Gaia, using Relic of Legends to tap it for mana before it gets bounced back to your hand. Effectively, TLDR, you get infinite dungeon activations, which there's one room in a dungeon called Dark Pool, which drains your opponent for 1, so it's a way to infinite combo. Small caveat, I would strongly recommend against trying to do the combo on Magic Online. I tried myself. Took me I was 10 minutes through the combo, dealt my opponent maybe about 5 damage, and I said, oh, I'm good. I'm off it. So, fair warning, playing this on Magic Online, bit of a struggle, but it is a really cool deck, and just wanted to give a shout out to Target. And again, not the last time you're going to see this. And then we get to the second challenge on Sunday. So, yeah, I'm just going to put the data up on the screen, and you can see for yourself. And no, that is not a typo. There is 10 copies of Rakdos Prowess in the top 32. I don't know if... So, I think what... I don't exactly know the timing on this, but I think they might be back-to-back, where there's a challenge that fires, and then there's a backup challenge just in case the first one doesn't fire, but frequently they both end up firing. And I wonder, this is just speculation, people that played, I think this one is the second challenge, so it's possible that people who were playing in the first one were like, well, I want to double queue, and I can't double queue with Azorius Control or Jund Sacrifice, so we're just going to play a deck that kills you on turn 3. So I don't know if that is something that is kind of messing with these numbers, but 10 is kind of a lot for the top 32. There's not really a ton to say about this one. There's nothing fancy going on here. As far as 10 Rakdos Prowess decks, there's got to be an explanation for that. Like I said, I think there might be some kind of double queuing thing going on here, but that is pretty much it for this challenge. We got one more left to talk about. And finally, we have the last challenge that took place on Sunday. And I mentioned we were going to be talking about Estrada again because, as you see, we have another appearance from Estrada. As far as the top of the heap, I guess is the word that I want to use here, 8 copies of Azorius Control. Again, most of these look pretty similar to what we've been seeing before with the Narsets and the High Noons, so it seems like that's a trend that's occurring. Makes a lot of sense. We've already touched on that. Jund Sacrifice, Rakdos Prowess. There's not really a ton of innovation going on in these decks. I will shout that every single Sacrifice deck that I've seen has had Yigra. Nobody is playing Rakdos anymore, so rest in peace. Rakdos, we are Jund Mages now. And then as far as the Prowess decks are concerned, like I said, there's not really a ton to talk about here. Like, I'm looking at this one from Manny in 8th place. I mean, there's not a lot of movement in these decks. They're all kind of the same. So we can skip that. Rakdos midrange, most of these lists are on more Archfiends. I think the majority of the midrange decks that I've seen have been playing 4 Archfiends, which I think makes a lot of sense because, 6/6, very good against Phoenix, and just, kills your opponent very quickly. And, the format is speeding up quite a bit, so Archfiend does make a lot of sense. Phoenix, same stuff. Lotus Field, and then we get into some of the spicier stuff. So as far as the top is concerned, Azorius being back on top, again, it's like, I think both of these challenges were happening at the same time, so you could use the data and say, okay, well, 10 Rakdos Prowess, the next challenge has a lot of Azorius to combat the Prowess deck, but I think that because these were happening at the same time, that's less likely to occur. So, I mean, realistically, if you kind of take out the outlier of the challenge before this, Azorius was really on top for most of the challenges, which is a little surprising. But like I said, that's because I personally, from the Phoenix side of things, have not minded the Azorius matchup. But as people adjust their decks and they play a lot more cards that are good against Phoenix game 1, they can certainly sway the matchup, especially post-board games as well. As far as this is concerned, the Jeskai Creativity deck was kind of interesting. We'll take a little touch on that real quick. Jund Sacrifice, 5 copies, Rakdos Prowess. I mean, we've seen all these decks. I guess I would say I'm a little surprised to see Jund Sacrifice this high. I've been told that Sacrifice has a bad Prowess matchup just because the Prowess deck is a little bit faster. They have a lot of ways to give trample, so they can kind of get through the Cauldron Familiar blocker setup. I haven't experienced the matchup a lot myself, but that's what I've been told. But yeah, that's pretty much it for the top. So let's talk about some spicy ones before I let you go. So losing in the finals of this challenge is Target, a name you might be familiar with. We were talking about in one of the previous challenges. Target lost in the finals. This is, I believe, the exact same deck list, exact same 75. So really big shout out to Target, putting up a pretty good weekend here, having a top, I think the other one was a top 16 finish, and now a finals appearance. So, I said earlier that I would recommend not playing the combo on Magic Online, but maybe Target has it down to a science because it's clearly working out well for them here. But yeah, Estrada, you're going to need to do a lot of clicking for this one, but really cool deck here. I would like to point your attention to the 20th place deck list by user V Daniels, and this is Boros Pia. Very similar to versions that we have played in the past, utilizing PNLR Console of Revival alongside ways to exile cards and play them, like Impulse and Resolve, and Showdown of the Scalds, as well as not only a very good card advantage engine at the top of the curve, but more ways to play cards from exile. The one thing that I want to note about this deck list that is very different than previous versions that we have played in the past, 3 copies of Monstrous Rage, which seems a little strange in a deck like this, because don't let the Swift Spears and the Soulscar Mages fool you. This is a mid-range deck. It has a lot of built-in card advantage, right? You have Bone Crusher Giant, Showdown of the Scalds, Reckless Impulse, Ren's Resolve, tons of ways to generate 2-for-1s, Pia to make a lot of tokens. But what I like about Monstrous Rage is you have prowess creatures, right? Soulscar, Swift Spear, Slick Shot. Really good with those cards to get through blockers, and Showdown of the Scalds, which the Chapter 2 puts counters on creatures, so you can load up on one big creature, and then Monstrous Rage, again, to get through blockers. So I actually like the Monstrous Rages, even though they seem like they're a little out of place in a deck like this. I think that's a good addition here to the Boros Pia deck, and shout out to V. Daniels. And then last but certainly not least, I want to give a shout out to 23rd place by Ivan Drago. Love that name, by the way. This is Jeskai Creativity. So we have seen various versions of Creativity. We've seen Boros, we've seen Izzet. Why don't we combine them both? Now, the creature of choice here is Atraxa Grand Unifier. There is a lot of discussion as far as what is the best creativity target. Some say it's Atraxa, some say it's Vaultborn. There was even, I believe it was from the previous challenge, the one that had 10 Rakdos Prowess, there was one Brave Soul still playing Worldspine Worm Xenagos, so flying the flag for that particular creature combination. But Atraxa is, again, between Atraxa and Vaultborn, they really do offer different things. Atraxa gives you a lot more of the cards up front. Vaultborn gives you more flexibility because you can creativity for X equals 2 and keep 2 actual creatures in the battlefield, whereas Atraxa's legendary, you only get to keep 1. Now, I think when we eventually get to Duskmourn, if your plan is to creativity for a legendary creature, I think for the most part, Vel'Kovoth is probably a better card than Atraxa, but time will tell. But just an interesting idea to, instead of playing Izzet or Jeskai, or Izzet or Boros, why don't we play both? Kind of the best of both worlds. You get the High Noon, you get the counterspells in the sideboard, Prismari Command, counterspells in the main deck, no more lies. So really cool list here from Ivan. And I think that will round us out. And that's going to put a wrap on week number 3 of watching the meta. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video, this kind of breakdown as we take a look and see what the metagame looks like. Just some closing thoughts here. A ton of Azorius control. So if you are watching the metagame as it is adapting around itself, Azorius control seems to be the clear target going into this next weekend. It has finally decided that it wants to try and beat Phoenix, and most of them have succeeded. And past that, it's really a neck and neck between Azorius and Rakdos Prowess. Maybe if you're playing Rakdos Prowess, you need to play a little bit more cards in the sideboard to shore up the blue-white matchup. Maybe something like Feed the Swarm could be good to destroy temporary lockdowns. I could certainly see that. And then past those 2 decks, I mean, it's kind of a smattering of Izzet Phoenix over here, Jund Sacrifice over there, and it is being condensed a little bit. It's not super duper top heavy like we saw 2 weeks ago. There was, I think, 3 or 4 challenges that had between 9 to 10 copies of Rakdos Prowess, and it was just out of control. Not quite as much as that, except for that one outlier on 922. But yeah, that's pretty much it. A lot of really sweet innovations. Again, the most important part about this is, please, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section down below on how we can improve on future videos. And if you made it all the way to the end of the video, be sure to like, subscribe, and I cannot wait to see you guys in the next one. But until next time, adios.